Good afternoon and welcome to the 11th and the final part of my lecture on standards on auditing. Here I will be completing the two standards which are coming in succession, and also the standard which I missed before. I had missed SA320, and as I promised you, I will be covering this in the last lecture. Okay, so SA320 is materiality in planning and performing an audit. So what is materiality? Materiality is if factors singly or jointly or in aggregate, they affect the economic decision of an entity, then they are said to be material, right? So influencing the economic decision, that means the management would have taken a different course of action had they known those factors earlier, then they are material. Now this factor of material depends upon the size and nature of the entity. So for certain transactions may be material, certain transactions may not be material. That depends on the professional judgment of the auditor. Depending on the size and nature of the entity, that affects materiality. So the auditor will have to study the business. He will require knowledge of the business. You have to understand the financial statements of the business. You'll have to check if there are any inherent limitations in the business. I'm just giving you key important words which you have to memorize before the exam. That's what I'm not explaining in too much detail. So auditor will require knowledge of the business, understanding the financial statements, inherent limitations in the audit. Then he will have to apply test of materiality. So he will check if factors singly or jointly, one or more factors affect the economic decision of the entity. If yes, he will say they are material, otherwise they are not material. If they are material, do they need to be disclosed or do they not need to be disclosed? So all these factors will have to be considered by the auditor. Okay. So after he will perform checks of materiality, towards the end the auditor has to document his work. So while documenting, he will check that whether materiality has to be applied, materiality has been applied by the auditor for a particular class of transactions or for all the transactions. That is, the business as a whole. So that is what the auditor will consider. And then he will have to check whether there is any revision in the materiality performances which is done. So will they have to revise the concept of materiality for the work the auditor has done? All this has to be documented in the statement. Okay. So that covers SA 320, materiality, planning and performance audit statements. We go to SA. What had we left last time? I think there were just two standards left. Using the work of internal auditor, SA 610 is left, and using the work of an auditing expert, 620 is left. Last time I covered SA 600, and according to me, using the work of another auditor should also include the work of an auditing expert, because when do you use another auditor? Because you might require expertise knowledge in a certain field, but Surbi Bansal does not agree. They write something else, which I feel is weird, because if you need some expert opinion, you should hire another auditor. So, but you want good marks in the final CA exam, stick to what the book says. In SA 600, do not mention the use of an audit expert. Just use the work of another auditor, which does not apply to joint auditor, predecessor auditor. Do not mention anything about audit expert. That is where I differ, but do not mention the work of an audit expert because you want good marks in your exam. Now come to SA 610, using the work of an internal auditor. When will you use the work of an internal auditor? To test if the internal controls, overview of some work, internal controls are strong or not. So for checking the internal controls, you will use the work of an internal auditor. However, this standard does not apply where the internal auditor is directly assessing the external auditor, or where, as per the standard, there is a regulation where the internal auditor is not allowed or is prohibited from showing his working papers to the external auditor. So he is prohibited by the law to show his working papers to the external auditor is not allowed, and where he is directly assessing the external auditor is not allowed. Now, this does not diminish the external auditor's responsibility if he is using the internal auditor. So, the internal auditor will have to check the skill and competence of the internal auditor, his objectivity, his professional competence, due care, etc., etc., his educational qualification, whether he is capable to do the job for which he has been hired for. All this will be considered. And also, if you check the risk of nature, timing, and extent of the risk of material misstatement as per SA 330. So, if there is any material misstatement, what are the subjectivity of the auditor, what are his comments, what is his feedback on that matter, and then the auditor will, for specific matters, if he is using the work of his internal auditor for specific matters, the external auditor will consider the supervision, the adequacy of audit evidence, the conclusions which he is using, the inherent limitations which have been pointed out by the internal auditor, whether there is proper communication with the internal auditor, all those factors, and eventually everything has to be documented, where he has used the work of an internal auditor, whether he's tested his competence, and also while documenting, he has to mention that it does not diminish his responsibility. Okay, so using the work of an internal auditor is complete. Now coming to using the work of an audit expert. So audit experts are of two types. There's a management expert and there's an auditor expert. Management experts are hired by the entity for its professional work, And auditor experts are persons other than those who are working in the firm, who are hired, who possess knowledge other than in auditing and accounting expertise. So they are hired by the auditor. So this is not covered by SA 620 using the work of an audit expert. We are using the work when the management is hiring someone who possess knowledge in audit. So when the auditor for his reference may hire someone, we are not concerned. But when the management hires an expert possessing knowledge on audit is what we consider as the standard. Okay. So this standard does not apply if there's an engagement team and the engagement team already has an expert, or where the auditor is appointing an expert. So only where the management is concerned. If there's an engagement team, it already has an expert, so that it's already dealt with there. You don't need another expert. Okay, so this is where the standard does not apply. So again, the same factors. If you're using the work of an audit expert, the responsibility of the main auditor, the principal auditor, is not diminished. He has to mention this fact, and he has to be aware of this fact. It's very important. His responsibility does not diminish, never diminishes. He's just using the audit expert for assistance. And he will check his objectivity, professional competence, education qualification, due skill, professional competence, care, etc., etc. All those factors will be considered. And if there's any risk of material misstatement, whether that has been corrected by the audit expert, whether he can place reliance on the work of the audit expert, whether there's proper communication between the audit expert and the principal auditor. Okay, all those factors are considered. Now, when you're using the work of an audit expert, you have to first know your content very well. That means the principal auditor himself has to be competent. If he is himself not competent, then reliance on the audit expert may lead to misleading conclusions. And he will see that whether the audit expert has properly documented his work. Because if he has not documented his work, the principal auditor will have problems in referring to his work. So whether reliance can be placed on the work of the external audit expert is also important. Whether reliance can be placed on the work of the audit expert is very crucial. So most of them are similar, but just mention that in SA 600 don't mention audit expert, because Surbi Bansal has a different tone there. Okay, so this covers 610 and 620, and also I covered SA 320, materiality in planning and performance on audit. This is not a substitute towards reading the summaries in Surbi Bansal. One day before your exam, don't read the detailed standard, just read the summaries. Go through the cases in your practice manual, but for the cases in the practice manual, just check which standard applies to which case. But don't read the explanation of the case, because you memorize the explanation as per Surbi Bansal or any other textbook which you may be referring. And those who do not study Surbi Bansal, I would advise you not to watch my videos, because study from one source. Alright, all the mnemonics, I'll be mentioning them in the comment section. All your doubts, you're always welcome. Even if you ask me as a simple question, what is 2 plus 2, I am morally bound to teach you. Right, that is my responsibility. I will not offend my students. This is an initiative, not for commercial motive. All other lectures which will come across, they'll just give you 2 or 3 demo lectures, and then the other standards are not taught. They'll ask you to join their classes. Here I've covered all the standards completely free of cost. Wishing you all the best, and thanking you for watching. Take care.